Welcome back to the Baunfire Gaming Podcast. This is episode 331. I am your host, Morgan, aka Bon Diesel, and this week we'll be talking about the Switch 2 Direct and subsequent fallout, South of Midnight reviews and my own first impressions, Grand Theft Auto 6's marketing strategy, and much more. Let's open up this podcast with a little talk about fandom and bias. I think this is a thing that's come up, obviously, this week after the reveal of the Switch 2 and it having, no matter your outlook on it, I think it's reasonable to say it's had a controversial reveal, and the discourse since the reveal has been pretty heated and motivated. I don't like to get into politics in this podcast as little as I can. I kind of have to in this episode for multiple reasons. But something I've noticed is that the game industry, specifically the gaming community and the discourse about video games, it almost feels like a way to predict what's going to come next in like general culture and even politics to a point when it comes to the temperature of vitriol and how good or bad discourse is going to be. I think one good example has been the console wars, right? I feel like, and maybe I'm looking back with nostalgia glasses, but I'm in my late 30s, and I remember a time where you were an Xbox guy or a PlayStation guy or a GameCube guy or whatever, right? And there was like, I would call them like petty or like friendly rivalries, right? Like the tribalism back there was very different, and it was like, oh, well, I have, I don't know, God of War on mine. And, the other guy would say, well, not Call of Duty. I've got Halo. I've got Halo 3, one of the best games ever made. And then GameCube would be like, I have, whatever I have. I didn't have a GameCube, sorry. But it just seemed lower, like temperature, right? Where now it's not. And I don't know if it's, I think it's 100% because of social media. I think social media was starting to exist back in those days, but was very different, and had very different influences and so on. And I really do believe that it's turned into a thing where, because the industry is changing so much, and because humans really hate change, we don't handle it very well. It's kind of there. And so, right now we have all of the grifters, the anti-woke, anti-diversity, whatever people. And then you have your kind of like run of the mill console warriors and stuff. And, I'll be talking about the Switch 2 today, and them doing that reveal and a bunch of the stuff that's come along with that. I'm going to be quite negative. I come at this as someone who was kind of is an outsider to the Nintendo atmosphere or whatever, community, whatever you want to call it, where I truly do believe that like PC gamers, PlayStation, Xbox gamers are kind of more in the same realm. And I genuinely do, and I don't mean this dismissively, I've just always kind of felt like Nintendo's just kind of doing their own thing. I feel like, as we see even Xbox and PlayStation really going two different directions, we saw Nintendo doing that back to the Wii days, honestly, in a lot of ways. Especially as, after the GameCube, they kind of de-emphasized trying to compete with the other platforms on graphics and performance and things like that. And they went more, to their own route, which they've continued to do. And some of the arguments and some of the, what I would call bad faith arguments I've seen, for or against the Switch 2 have just really reminded me of like, how like almost completely useless gaming discourse is now. I think for anyone who just like I've got a friend at work who we talk about gaming stuff sometimes, and we have like reasonable back and forths about stuff. But I really do believe that social media and online anonymity and especially monetized social media and YouTube and Twitch, monetized content creation with a really low bar, almost anyone can get monetized nowadays, has really ruined these conversations, and I think that's a shame. I'm hoping it comes back around. I like to think that many things in the world are pendulums, and they often swing back and forth, and where maybe things are really bad at some point, that when they get bad enough that they start to swing back the other way and things get better. I think that's kind of my theory on how the world works in general. It's being tested quite heavily right now, but I still have hope. And so that hope remains for gaming discourse as well. Um, we'll see. Okay, so let's get into the gaming news. Obviously, the first story here is going to be the Nintendo Switch 2 reveal. Not too many stories this week. I think mostly companies avoided this week because they knew all of the energy was going to be sucked up by Nintendo. I can almost guarantee that next week we'll probably have like twice as much info and reveals and stuff as we had already. But we'll get into the Switch 2 thing, and I have a few other stories we can touch as well. So the Switch 2, it's coming on June 5th. That is a one day before Summer Game Fest, Jeff Keighley's thing, which I find kind of interesting. Maybe kind of a like Nintendo trying, like, probably didn't even care. Like I think sometimes Jeff's whole thing is made a little bit bigger to the more tuned in people than it really is. Of course, he always, oh, there was 100 billion people watch the show this year. I feel like there's some funny business going on there with those numbers. But if there was ever a reminder of how niche some of these things are, it's them putting this release day the day before. Pre-orders were supposed to start on April 9th. So one of the updates, and I'll be doing this throughout talking about these things. The United States, has implemented a bunch of tariffs, like a bunch of them on basically everyone this week. And so in the US, we are supposed to be able to start doing pre-orders on the Switch 2 next week. And now they are indefinitely delayed while they try to figure out things with the tariffs. Something to keep in mind. I believe whether it's Vietnam where they're producing a lot of these, or Japan, I believe it's like a 34% potential tariff on these items on the Switch 2. If that full tariff, if that's what gets put in, gets passed on to the customers, which it will, the retailers aren't going to take. Consoles have a minuscule profit margin. They may have some profit margin for the actual company, especially Switch 2, but not for the retailers. So they're not going to take any cost they don't have to. You could see a roughly $150 jump in the price. That would basically just be for American users. So that would mean we'll talk about that. So the price is $450 for the base Switch 2. So device, one set of controller, I think the dock, I certainly hope so, as well as all the basic stuff. Then there's a $500 version that includes Mario Kart World, the new one that's coming out that will be exclusive to the Switch 2, which is a $80 game on its own. We'll get to that. So the tariffs could raise the price of the base game, the base system, up to $600 potentially, and the bundle up to $650. That would be untenable. There's a lot of discourse going on right now about the price. I think 450 is insane for what they're putting out. I'll maybe speak more on that at the end after we talk about all the details, because I understand why some people feel like it's worth 450, especially today. I think there's some debate to be had there. If the tariffs get implemented and it raises the price of this thing to $550, $600, you can't buy this thing. It's not worth that much. I know some people have extra money, they'll do it either way, or they're just Nintendo folks, and I get it, it's fine. This comes along with these tariffs are likely going to cause an issue in the United States, which could and almost certainly will lead to a depression, a financial depression. And if it's anything like back in 2008, when I was, we're about to leave college, which was great timing, we will likely see significant layoffs and unemployment. Uh, if this happens, buying this console will probably be the least of anyone's worry. Maybe we'll see. I have no idea. People's priorities are weird. The games right now are being the new games are being listed between $70 and $80. For example, there's a Banjo Kazooie game, not Banjo Kazooie, a Donkey Kong game, a new one, brand new one, 3D, first one in a long time. That will be $70, but then the Mario Kart World will be $80. There's also been rumors that the physical editions could be $10 more, but that hasn't been confirmed yet. It's been kind of debated and debunked, and we're kind of waiting to see what actually happens with that. It is interesting that it seems like some games are going to be too big, or for some reason can't be put on physical, but you'll still be able to buy them physical, but you'll get a code instead of the game won't be on the physical disc. This is only going to be for some games. For example, Cyberpunk, which we'll talk about. Cyberpunk 2077 is going to be on Switch 2, but is it going to fit on one of their cards? I'm kind of amazed that there could be any games that won't fit if Cyberpunk will, but who knows? Those things work in mysterious ways. One of the weirder things about this announcement is, we'll talk about here in a minute, the new controllers have all these new features, all these new gimmicks to them. And they have a tech demo from Nintendo that shows you and how to do all these new things and all the new features. And so surely that comes free with the console, right? Because of course it would, but it doesn't. You have to pay for it. It's like $6. It's not the price. That's the issue. It could be $1. It's just, why would you charge for this? Why would you charge $6 for a tech demo that's literally only there to be like, hey, here's how you use your device? I don't know. I'll let the people who buy it decide on that. The screen is a 7.9 LCD screen, a 7.9 inch LCD screen. It can do up to 120 frames per second or hertz, and it has HDR. It was interesting, the discourse on this, because so many people just felt like there was no way this wouldn't be an OLED screen, which is something that the original Switch got a couple years after it came out, with no other upgrades. Those screens aren't as expensive now as they were then. So I understand that there was a chance, especially at this price point. I think it probably should have been. I'll talk more about why later. But it's not. It does sound like it could be it's like some kind of like higher end LCD screen, especially if it has actual functional HDR and can do 120 frames. This isn't just going to be some bog standard, what the Switch original had. It'll be something a little bit nicer than that. The hardware is interesting. So they haven't detailed the kind of processor, GPU, any of that stuff yet. They are claiming it can do 4K 60 FPS or 1080p 120 FPS docked, and then some lower version of those undocked. There was some question, including for myself, on whether or not this thing even has DLSS. If you're not super techie, you may not know that the first Switch and this new one as well both actually have NVIDIA CPU and GPU tech in them. They're based off of those, so they don't use Intel or AMD. They're using NVIDIA chips. And with this new one, the rumor has been for months and years at this point that it would have DLSS. That is the tech that NVIDIA has that can take basically a low quality, a low power system or gaming presentation and bump it up to 4K or higher frame rates or whatever. And that appears to be what they have here. NVIDIA has put out a blog confirming that the Switch 2 has DLSS, and that it will have the ability to have ray tracing in some of the games. I don't believe we've seen either of those technologies actually in progress or being used in any of these game demos yet. One of the interesting things for me and we'll get to the game specifically, but Cyberpunk is one of the games that will be on the system, but it's only going to be 30 FPS undocked, and it's only going to be 40 FPS docked with various resolutions. That's weird because DLSS NVIDIA uses Cyberpunk as like their main test bed for all of their DLSS tech, and so it does really surprise me that not that there's not even going to be an option for even just 60 FPS here. But maybe that 40/30 is going to be doing ray tracing and stuff. I don't know yet. 40 is okay. It's still not 60 or higher, and it does make me wonder how powerful this thing really is. I think that's gonna be an interesting discussion in the future. There's been a lot of conversation. I've seen people being like about the price of this system, like, oh, it's $450. It's yeah, maybe it's more expensive than a Series S, but it can do 120 frames or it can do 4K, and the Series S can't do that. Or even someone today even was like, well, there's like no games even on the Series X or the PS5 that actually run in 4K at 60 FPS. And I think there's going to be a pretty wild reality check here, where the target power for this new Switch 2 is presumed to be around like the Xbox One X or the PS4 Pro, not even the Series S, right? And the reason that matters is it's sort of true that the PS5 and the Series X don't even hardly run any games at like native 4K at 60 FPS. They're almost all upscaled, at least to some capacity. So will the Switch 2. Like the Switch 2 isn't doing any of that stuff. For one thing, it's only in docked mode. For another thing, one of the big things about upscaling tech, like DLSS, is the base resolution it's starting with. So the whole idea is that, say you want DLSS to put a 4K image on your TV or screen or whatever, and so you have a GPU in your system that that has DLSS. What it does is it takes a lower resolution, so 1440p, 1080p, maybe even 720p, 900p maybe, and it upscales that. The higher that base resolution is that the system can actually run, the better the upscaling is going to be, because it has to do less work, right? It's a lot easier to upscale 1440p, which is 2K, up to 4K. And it's not too challenging to upscale 1080p up to 4K. But then you start getting down into 900p, 720p, and you start dealing with, because the AI, the machine learning and stuff in the GPU in DLSS has to do a lot more guessing to make things look good, right? I think what's going to happen is, these people, especially the ones who are like, well, Series X and PlayStation don't even, well, they do. They have performance modes that have 4K resolutions. They're probably from a base resolution of like 1080p or 1440p. My assumption from what we've seen so far is that when your Switch 2 is running 4K 60 FPS or 1080p 120 FPS, it's going to be doing base resolutions of like 480p, 720p. It's going to be starting from a pretty low number, and it's likely either not going to look very good or be extremely laggy, to have a ton of input latency, because that's what happens when it has to generate all this info. We'll see. I could be wrong. Digital Foundry will lead us the way. I'm sure we'll get a bunch of good info from them. But I've seen almost some like overconfidence by some people, kind of being like, well, the Series S can't even do the things that they're saying this thing can do. It's like, well, the Series S is probably just be more realistic about what it can and can't do, and it's being targeted that way. So we'll have to wait and see. There's also they haven't even specified exactly what version of DLSS this thing is using. The impression I'm under from Digital Foundry coverage and other analysts is that this 8 nanometer SoC, or this CPU GPU combo that is in this, is kind of old. It could be 2 to 3 years old at this point. And there's a really, really good chance it doesn't have the right the right tech in it, or just the system in general won't have the right tech to be able to do like DLSS 4, which just came out, or even DLSS 3. This could be as old as DLSS 2, which is still okay, but definitely isn't as efficient and as good at handling this stuff. It could be like a custom version, kind of like how PSSR, the PlayStation upscaler, kind of sounds like now. It's just a version of AMD's upscaler called FSR. My guess is that whatever DLSS is in the Switch 2 is likely going to be some kind of customized version, likely based on DLSS 2, that, basically they've thrown in every feature it can handle. And that probably means that it won't be as efficient. And one of the things I didn't even put on here, but the estimated battery life for the Switch 2 in handheld mode is 2 to 6 hours. That's not great. And it's in big part due to this kind of old tech it's using to do the things it's going to do. So yeah, we'll surely be hearing more about that. The Joy-Con 2, it's now going to be $90 for a new set of controllers. Hopefully they have that stick drift issue figured out, or else it's going to be very pricey for them to have to fix that again. The new Joy-Cons have a chat button integrated that you can do. They finally have voice chat through their own online system. I have zero faith it's going to work very well, but we'll see. They also have this feature where you can get into like a chat room with your friends and see what they're playing down at the bottom while you continue to play on a bigger screen up at the top. When they showcased this, it showcased it as your friend's gameplay. It looks like it runs at like 7 or 8 frames per second. Doesn't really seem like you can watch it like what they're actually doing very well. And then they also showed off that you can plug in a webcam to the second USB-C port on your docked Switch 2, and you can see your friends' faces or whatever they decide to show on the camera, like over their gameplay. It looked abysmal, and this was like what they were showing people for fun. Almost always the actual result is not going to be quite as good. So that's interesting. This screamed gimmick to me that this is going to be a thing that they're going to kind of throw in there and no one's ever going to use. Similar to the Joy-Con, you can now use them as a mouse. You can, in theory, use both of them at once, both as mice. I assume they basically have a little mouse optical sensor on the bottom, because you hold them. If you hold the Switch, the controllers, the Joy-Cons, like horizontally, you kind of flip them long ways vertically, and there's a sensor there, so you use it like a mouse. It looks like the most uncomfortable thing I've ever seen. I don't have small hands. I don't even have giant hands, but I don't have very small hands. But even for people who do, this really tiny mouse that they're going to think that you're going to use, it's a cool idea. Don't get me wrong, but the ergonomics of this look abysmal. They look awful. So I'm curious if they'll release an attachment or a special, kind of more dedicated mouse controller at some point. It's Nintendo. I'm not holding my breath. So we'll see. And these attach magnetically. So one of the big complaints about the original Switch that I've even seen a ton of is that the mechanical connection between the Joy-Cons and the Switch are not perfect. And if anything, they feel kind of loose and they cannot feel great when you're playing. This magnetic attachment, in theory, should be much more secure and should feel really nice. The system will come with 256 gigabytes of internal storage. And continues to use SD cards for expansion. The Switch 2 will only use SD Express cards. These are a much more, 4 to 5 times more expensive than standard SD cards. My guess is the internal storage is likely just a embedded SD card as well. It's pretty wild to me that they have that the memory amount is this low. 256 gigs at this time just doesn't seem like enough, in my opinion. And to use this really old SD card tech, I've seen some people posting about how the SD Express can technically be as fast as like an NVMe drive. I suspect that is technically true. I would be pretty surprised if that is how it actually works. It's pretty nuts to me that they didn't include at least 500 gigs. I would say, from what I saw, the SD Express card prices, you almost certainly could have done like a 500 gig or even the 1 terabyte M.2 NVMe to even if it was just soldered onto the board for a similar price and had way more memory. Like, with a terabyte drive in this thing, you probably wouldn't even need expansion. And if you did, you could continue using this outdated SD card, format. But this is a weird one to me. It's just another thing about this presentation that really made me feel like Nintendo very much is stuck in a world 10 years ago. But that's a whole different discussion. They have 4 tiers of games from what I can gather, which is going to be interesting. I feel like when other platforms do this, wink, wink, Xbox, does anything confusing like this, they get just eviscerated for it. And Nintendo, it just is what it is. So they're Switch 2 exclusive games, only on Switch 2. They won't work on the old consoles, specifically the Switch 1. Then there will be Switch 2 editions of Switch 1 games that you have to pay for. There will be Switch 1 games that will get some free enhancements, but not full Switch 2 editions, so they won't get all of the upgrades. I'm assuming these will be Switch 1 games that will just get higher frame rates. And then there's Switch 1 games that will get no enhancements. Now, the Switch 2 edition games, which will be Switch 1 games with a full, like, legit upgrade to all of the Switch 2 tech. Apparently, some of them you won't have to pay for if you have their online subscription. I don't know. This is insane. It makes me so appreciative of, the Xbox with their FPS boost thing that they had and all of their automatic upscaling they did, where like the game studios didn't even have to do anything to give their old 30 FPS games 60 FPS, and even to the point where they had like a bunch of upscaling stuff that they put in that the devs didn't have to do anything to make the games look more modern and more crisp and all that. This especially made me thankful for that because this looks like they're going down the Sony route of calling, next gen patches, labeling them as something different and making you pay for them. We don't know the prices of these upgrades yet. What I've seen is that like the Tears of the Kingdom, they're going to do a Switch 2 edition of that. I don't know what the upgrade cost is if you already have the Switch 1 game, but it looks like the price of the full game, if you buy it straight up, is going to be $70, and it could be higher. So we'll see how that plays out. And then they, kind of wrapped up the show, or a big part of the end was the third-party support, which is substantial and includes games like Cyberpunk 2077, Final Fantasy Remake. Yes, they are getting it before Xbox, which is hilarious to me at this point. Like, I think PlayStation so obviously paid specifically for it not to be on Xbox in some deal at some point in their exclusivity deal. Elden Ring, which is one of my favorite ones. It's a special edition of Elden Ring called the Tarnished Edition, which, if you know what the word tarnished means, it's, implying, or at least, it's a joke about how it's going to be a lesser version. Like, that game barely runs on the Series X and PlayStation 5. It's going to be rough on the Switch 2, even though it's more powerful than the original Switch. And then they announced a console exclusive From Software game called The Duskbloods. From what I've seen, I don't know anything about Bloodborne on the PlayStation. Apparently, this game basically looks like a spiritual successor to that, a game that people have been dying for a sequel of on PlayStation, or at least a remaster or a remake, so they don't have to play on 30 FPS on, like, I think it's PS4 graphics. Not happening. And it was interesting that the Duskbloods got announced, or more detailed, as a multiplayer PvPvE game. That it's like a round-based thing, and that you have to win matches. It's seems to suck a lot of the air out of that. So with all this info, people have been arguing about prices and the games and this and that and the other. I went into this before this announcement. If you look back at my old shows, some of my old videos, even my social media posts, I was getting a Switch 2. There was going to be no doubt. And now I'm not. I'm not going to. The price is a big part of it. That $450, even just for the base console, even the $500 with a pretty well discounted game, I would need at least one more set of controllers. Those are $90 now. So I'd be looking at 590. I would need to buy more than just Mario Kart. I'd be buying at least a few games. And my one of my biggest issues is that, I would probably want the Switch 2 version of some of these classic games from the Switch. So those are gonna be 70, $80. But I can't even go back and buy like some old Nintendo games that I haven't been in the ecosystem forever, because they're still 50, $60, even fairly old games. Um, like all in all, I'd probably be in for like $1,000 to get into this ecosystem now, not to mention the online subscription. And I just, nothing they showed, nothing I've ever seen from Nintendo, at least not in the last couple generations, it makes that feel worth it. Just kind of the same how I appreciate and I'm very interested in a lot of PlayStation games, but I'm not gonna pay $400 or $500 for a console or 700 for a Pro to play The Last of Us 2 when I've seen playthroughs of it. I get the gist. I'm sure it feels better to play it than to watch it, but I have no investment in that in these platforms, and now it's so expensive to get into them that I kind of just don't feel that need anymore. I was gonna get this basically for my kid and my wife to be able to play over the summer and things like that, but we just got her a new tablet. That was a couple $100 for Christmas, and that thing does everything I can ask it to do. Sure, like the argument with Nintendo is always going to be like the first party exclusives, and that's fair. There's not really much of that coming, at least not yet. That's only that's exclusive to the Switch 2. I think one of my biggest things is how I feel like there's like two groups of people involved in this discussion, and it's either you're like a hardcore Nintendo fan who doesn't care about graphics and performance because there's no way you could if you've been heavily involved in the current gen or even their previous systems. So so if you're like a diehard Nintendo person that doesn't care about frame rate and doesn't care about resolutions and stuff, why would you upgrade to this? There's so few games that are only going to be playable on Switch 2. You might as well just keep your Switch 1, especially if you have an OLED one. And then if you are one of those people who's, more like me, who does care about graphics and frame rates and all that stuff, like they didn't show anything that's going to be exclusive to Switch 2 that looks like it's like, Mario Kart World, like looks nice, has a good art style, but you could tell me that's a GameCube game and I'd believe you. I'm sure it's much beyond that. But, it just doesn't, didn't look that enticing, especially at the price point. And I just, the third party thing, like for the first group, it's cool. Like for the Nintendo diehards, having more third party support if they don't have an Xbox or a PlayStation or a PC, that's great. That's really cool for them. But you can't be like, to me, be like, well, you could play Cyberpunk on the go for $450 or a lot more once you actually buy everything. Where I could just be like, I'll just buy a Steam Deck or a ROG Ally or something, especially with the Xbox One being teased right now. It's just, that's a nicety for the people who want this system anyways. It's not a selling point, at least not for me. And so, for the graphics focused people or the frame rate focused people, then they should probably just get a PlayStation or an Xbox or a PC or one of these higher end handhelds that isn't that much more expensive than this thing. So I'm just left with like this feeling of like, man, they are really just trying to sell a new console to their 130 plus million Switch users already, which is fair. That's a huge customer base to target. I just, I don't, I just like feel kind of confused about who this is for. So, I think this system's going to be successful. I'm sure it's going to do well. Like if those tariffs hit, it's definitely going to hurt it quite a bit, but that's going to be everything. If those tariffs hit this and make this thing $600 or whatever, we have way bigger problems than that. But that's a whole different discussion. I just yeah, I'm bummed. Honestly, personally, I'm bummed out because I was really hoping this would be a thing where it would be like, oh dang, like $399. It does do all this really cool new stuff. The games are, affordable, even though we know they never go down in price. Like, here's all this excitement. And instead, it's just kind of like, oh, wow, that's a little more expensive than I thought it was going to be. Oh, these games like really don't like look like that big of a deal. I think my final take I'll give on this before I move on is there's been rumors for a long time that this specific system, that they've kind of just had it benched for a couple of years. That even the tech inside of it, the SoC, the GPU, CPU tech, is a few years old, and that's been finalized for a while. If it's true that they could have released this 2 or 3 years ago, and they just decided not to because they wanted to wait for Switch sales to drop, which is fair, that they're a business. That's what businesses should do. This, in my opinion, should have been a Switch Pro 2 years ago. This just doesn't feel like a new generation hardware piece. This seems iterative. This reminds me a ton of the PS5 Pro. It's a fair bit more expensive. It's got this, upscaling tech that's kind of the big selling point for it, and the exclusives are a selling point. But it doesn't really, and, the PS5 Pro specifically isn't a next gen console, or else it'd be called the PS6. But this kind of feels like they did that same thing, and instead of calling it the Switch Pro, they just waited a couple more years and called it the Switch 2. And it would have been kind of outdated back then, but not too much. And now it's definitely outdated, at least in some ways. And a bunch of the things they're doing here feel pretty outdated. But they're going to shove it down everyone's throat anyways. And a bunch of people are going to be more than happy to do it. So I know I'm on the outside here. I was really hoping not to be for much longer, but I think I will continue to be kind of an outsider here. And I'm genuinely kind of bummed about it. So I'm curious how this plays out with the tariffs, with everything. I'm really interested to see Digital Foundry and other kind of analysts get a hold of the actual hardware and start doing testing and give us some idea of how powerful this thing really is, especially in comparison to other handhelds and even the home consoles and things like that. Maybe I'm wrong about everything I think about it. I suspect I'm not. I did want to do a quick talk about what this may mean for the next Xbox and PlayStation. I think that there is a very real possibility that even subsidized, the next Xbox and PlayStation, could be $600, $700, $800. And that's just hoping that by then the tariff stuff is gone or figured out. These things are only getting more expensive, right? Unfortunately, when things get more expensive, they rarely go back. Even with COVID, at least here in the States, a lot of stuff, justifiably or not, got more expensive during COVID due to, issues with manufacturing, due to issues with supply chains and all of that. But those things cleared up, and those things are still the same price. They never were like, okay, guys, we're fully stocked up again. We have all of our people working. We'll lower the prices back down for you. Or they did, and they did the shrinkflation thing where, something went from, it was, say it was 12 ounces of something for $10, and they raised it to $15 during COVID. Well, they drop it back down to 10, but they also drop it down to 10 ounces, right? So that there's been a ton of that, and that's probably what's going to happen here. The tariffs may be more flexible, but if Sony and Xbox and Microsoft see the Switch 2 be pretty successful, even though it's $150 more than the previous console, even though I would argue it doesn't really feel like it's $150 better, we're probably going to see similar actions from the other console platforms. Same with games. If they sell millions of copies of Mario Kart, on its own, not bundled necessarily, which they'll count them the same. If these games still sell really well at this higher price point, we're gonna likely see more 70, but also 80, maybe 90, maybe $100 games from the other platforms as time goes on. The rumor has been going around forever about Grand Theft Auto 6 potentially being $100, just because Rockstar's like, it's Grand Theft Auto. We know you're gonna buy it, so we're gonna tack $30 onto it. Maybe we'll give you some DLC or something to make it feel better. And that's just the way it's going to be. And that's very likely. So it stinks. I hope that's not what happens. One of the biggest concerns, at least in my experience, in my situation, is, all the prices, the rate at which they're going up is not the rate at which my pay is going up. It goes up a little every year, and we're okay. We're not, destitute at this point, at least. But that expense jump is often more than the pay jumps, and I think that's only going to get worse, as at least here in the short term. So hang on to your butts. Things are about to get wild. South of Midnight has gone into early access and will be fully released next week. It has a current Open Critic score of 78, started off around 82 with around 20 reviews. Now I assume it's in 50, 60 plus reviews, so that's why it came down a little bit. The overall thing on this is that it seems like it's a really good game, good story, good characters, good voice acting, looks good, good graphics, good environments, all of that. It's just not very fun to play. The most of the complaints I saw were about the combat just not being super interesting or fun, and the gameplay, the platforming and stuff just being okay. I'm 2 or 3 hours into it. I believe it has 12 chapters. I'm on chapter 3. I pretty much agree. I think the things that are good, which are most of the things, are extremely good. The music, especially. The game might just be worth playing for the music, or I may just find the soundtrack and listen to it all the time. It's just the gameplay is like it's fine. It's kind of run in the mill. It feels very like the combat and stuff, especially after playing a lot of the games I've played lately that have really good combat, things like Avowed and things like that. It feels fine. It's not bad. I don't think the combat or the platforming is bad. It feels okay. My only real annoyance is that the vaulting system. So like when you jump near a ledge and you pull yourself up, there's so many instances in this game where you're running and there's like a log in front of you, and your jump should easily get you over the log to just jump over it. But for some reason, halfway through your jumping animation, it like has to grab onto that ledge and climb over the limb, and then you jump off the tree or whatever. I really, it feels, that doesn't feel good. Like I understand, like if you can't clear it, then it's going to do that. But there's whether it's steps or ledges or whatever that you should definitely just be able to jump onto. And like halfway through the animation, it'll stop it and you'll grab on and then climb up. It's a nitpicky thing, and that means that the rest of the game is pretty cool. But that's one thing I'll throw out there. What I will say is that between the characters and the music and the dialogue and just the style of this game, I would like to hope that this is kind of like a tech demo. It's not a very long game. It's not even a full price game. I would really love for this to do well and get reviewed well, and for Compulsion to be like, okay, let's do a bigger experience. Let's do a more traditional big AAA version of this, rather than the kind of AA game that we got this time, especially if they can focus on trying to make that gameplay and the combat and the traversal a little smoother, or a little more engaging, or a little more fun, really. So South of Midnight, cool game. I'm probably right now, I'm obviously not done with it yet, probably sitting in like the 8 out of 10 range, which feels pretty right. When I finish it, I'll probably just review it on another podcast. I probably won't do a whole video for it, but we'll see. Now we have Take-Two's Strauss Zelnick, the head of that publisher, says that they're holding off on Grand Theft Auto 6 marketing for a short campaign right before release. This is kind of how they do things. I believe multiple times they've announced blockbuster games like Red Dead Redemption 2 just a few months before they come out, hit that marketing campaign really hard, and then the game comes out and does extremely well. That seems like what they're doing here. It obviously is making all of the truthers who think that it's going to get delayed until next year. It gets them all riled up thinking that that's what's going to happen, and it could, but they seem pretty set on 2025 at this point. And I'm sure it's going to be so funny when they announce the release date of Grand Theft Auto 6 the next day or the next week. You will see so many press releases from every other publisher revealing when their games are coming out this fall or early next year. Because once that date is set, you'll start seeing everyone trying to get their spots around it. No one wants to release that week. No one probably wants to release the week before or after Grand Theft Auto 6, because it's just going to suck up so much conversation. But yeah, it's going to be funny when they announce, and then the reaction from all the other publishers of like, oh my God, okay, here's when our next game's coming out. So that'll be fun to see. Then the final story here, PlayStation's Phil Rosenberg did an interview that led to more rumors about Black Myth Wukong having an exclusivity deal. To be clear, I saw this being reported as he was like admitting it. That's not what happened. There was just a question and answer where he talked about a program that PlayStation has that kind of seeks out studios and games that they can kind of promote and turn into something bigger than it was. And Black Myth Wukong is one of these, from them finding that Chinese studio and kind of becoming a liaison to, show this studio to the West in this game. Now, they talked about multiple games that they've done this with, and I think every other game besides Black Myth Wukong is exclusive and has a deal that we know about with PlayStation. And so that led to people kind of putting one and one together, making two, and being like, oh, well, then that game, Black Myth obviously has a deal as well. I definitely think that game has a deal. I just think people should be careful about assuming that means that he was like admitting it here. My whole reason for believing it is that multiple times when asked, Xbox like official marketing PR has said like, hey, we want Black Myth on our system. There's, as far as we know, there's no tech limitations because the Black Myth devs have kind of insinuated the Series S is a problem, even though there's really no reason it would be. And Microsoft has been like, hey, we can't control the deals they make with other platforms. Seems like pretty clear messaging to me. I think Xbox has way more to lose about lying about this than even the studio does here, and PlayStation's just dead silent about it because why would they say anything? It wouldn't help anything for them to say a single word. They just are going to suck up that 30 million sales, however many they're going to sell of that game, mostly in its home region, but a lot in other places as well. And this is the only thing that's going to make this game come up in conversation ever again. Like, it's so funny to me how this game mirrored Hogwarts Legacy so much, in that it was a game that sold a lot because of non-game reasons. And it was an okay game, but a large number of people wanted it to be a game of the year. This is talking about both of those games, even though they probably didn't really deserve it. They're okay, right? And then once their moment's gone, you just never hear about them again. And that's what I fully expect. The only thing we'll hear about this is it's the same thing that happens every time a game isn't coming to Xbox for some reason, even if it's not Xbox's fault. It's always such a big story, and then it always gets resolved because Xbox seems to work pretty well with these people to figure things out. And when it gets resolved, or we don't get any clear answers, that you never hear about that game ever again. I think it's very interesting. Okay, so moving into some content updates. I had some April Fool's Day fun. If you don't follow me on social media, then you won't know that I, for a few hours, became a crockpot slow cooker content creator. I left gaming behind, but I just found that it's just a really backwards community, and it's just a really gross community. I didn't realize how much infighting and awfulness there was in the crockpot community. And so I decided to leave it. And a few hours later, I came back to gaming content creation. So here I am. I am almost finished, I think, with Assassin's Creed Shadows. I'm 60 plus hours in, so I hope I'm almost done. I really love this game. It's my game of the year right now. It can be beaten out. South of Midnight is not going to be that guy. Avowed is a close second, but I think Assassin's Creed has overshadowed Avowed for me. We do still have games like Claire Obscure 33, hopefully the Battlefield game coming later this year, as well as a handful of others that I think are all waiting for Grand Theft Auto to announce their release date. There's more games coming. This could get usurped for sure, but Shadows is great. And I do plan on doing a separate review of it once I'm done. I'll probably, like I said before, I'll probably just do my review of South of Midnight like next week or the week after during my regular show. I am trying to arrange a Mass Effect Hypecast episode. I was going to try to do one with N7 Legend, but he has other things going on right now. So that might have to just wait until the end of the year with N7 Day. And then Summer Game Showcase is coming up. It's 2 months away. So I obviously I will, assuming I'm here, we'll do the whole live stream of Jeff Keighley's show and whatever. I'm so jaded on his shows. I think they're extremely overrated at this point, but that's just me. But PlayStation will probably do a show, Xbox will do something. All the big, Ubisoft more than likely we'll kind of see what's going on with all of those, and we'll do all of that coverage. I am taking a fairly long vacation sometime this summer, so I'll have to kind of sync those things up and see how they work. I also have some time coming off here fairly soon. I have too much PTO at work where I'm not earning it anymore, so I need to use a bunch of it so I don't miss out on future vacation time. So I'll be around. I'll be trying to make some more content, streaming some more, and doing a bunch of housework. So I'll be having fun with that. And this is where we're going to wrap it up. So thank you very much for listening to this episode. Subscribe to the show on your favorite podcast app. Leave a review on Spotify or iTunes. And subscribe to the Bond Diesel YouTube channel to get all of my videos, including this podcast. Thank you to everyone who supports as a YouTube member or a Twitch subscriber. If you are interested in supporting this show and all of my other content, please check out the links in the show description. If you have any questions or feedback, be sure to comment on Spotify or YouTube. Let me know in my Discord or hit me up on social media at Baundiesel or at the Baunfire. That is all I have for this episode of the Baunfire Gaming Podcast. So, until next time.